do you live and work in the same neighborhood? So, or do you see a difference in your two neighborhoods at all? Tell me where you, because your shop is in the West End, and what neighborhood do you live in? And
Holly Hills.
do you see much difference in the way things work? I'm thinking about all of the extra supplemental patrols we've talked about in the West End.
Well, this West End seems very together about this stuff and very on top of it. And I think maybe one of the reasons is because of the commercial aspect of it and
Hospitals.
Yeah, and there's
school.
everybody is pretty willing to get involved. I know on the street front, you know, the businesses we're pretty responsive, and we have good, you know, email connections. We hear what's going on. We stay up on stuff. Holly Hills is a residential neighborhood by and large, and it's similar in some ways because we are sort of edged. It's like the economic and even racial, there's divides kind of street to street a little bit, but it's a very Catholic neighborhood, and it's a very close-knit neighborhood by and large. So in a certain way, it really kind of takes care of itself pretty well, just in a different way than the West End does.
So we know, not in your department, but throughout the response to Ferguson, we've seen a couple of officers early on that were suspended for some things they said or actions they took during the unrest. But I've also seen a lot of video of individuals, a small percentage, I would argue, by what I've seen and what I've watched online, but we've seen some individuals who are really been pretty aggressive to some of your officers, to the point where they've kind of been chased, for lack of a better word, cornered back into their vehicles, and their vehicles are hit and things of that nature. Just curious what you're telling your officers going forward, and how are they holding up? Nobody probably asks that too often.
Well, the first thing is I want to say I could not be more proud of the men and women of the Metropolitan Police Department and the men and women of law enforcement as a whole. These have been unprecedented times. Their professionalism, their restraint, you saw in the video, it's stressful. It is. When somebody is standing in your face, inches away from your face, and talking about your wife or your children and the things that are going to do to your children, I ask where the humanity is in that conversation sometime. But it's important to remember that they've always acted professionally. Nobody has been injured on either side of the equation during this entire time. That's because of the professionalism, I believe, that the law enforcement has shown. So it's taking a toll. It absolutely is, but I think it's human nature. We've offered counseling. We've had counselors come to the area police stations to talk to the officers. We've done events for family to try and make sure that they're cohesive, but we still have a little bit of ways to go.
Going forward, we started the show by saying this was kind of a watershed moment. Where do you see policing in the next 5 to 10 years in our region here or across the country?
I think there's a few things to sort of wrap up with some of these comments. Number one, I do think technology is going to shift in terms of body cameras. And one of the things we were talking about off camera was, what are the parameters? For example, when I was a young police officer, I interrupted 2 rapes in progress. And so I can only imagine if we would have gone in and had body cameras, what do we do with this situation where we've got a naked woman who's being raped? She has a privacy right. And so we have to think about those types of things, and we have to think about these things thoroughly. We have to think about these things in terms of the humanity, not just the bureaucracy of it, but the humanity of it. I think another issue is, I agree with Rick, that we do need to increase the level of minority representation in this area in terms of law enforcement. But I also agree with the comment from my friend across the river who's saying white police officers can be effective in minority communities. When I was a young cop in Los Angeles, I worked all black neighborhoods essentially for the first year and a half on the street. And it took a little bit of work, but I was able to earn the trust. And so I think sometimes we think too much about black-white. And if we think about human to human, which is what we should always be driving for, then we will be able to start to get some of these things taken care of. And I do think that there will be a meeting where technology will assist with this. Because what's going to happen, quite frankly, when every single police shooting, well, not every single one, but the vast majority come out on video, the vast majority of the time the police officer is behaving appropriately. And I think people will say, now wait a second, this is what we call in the business a good shooting, so we don't need to get upset about it. There's enough bad police work out there that has been documented, and we need to focus on the bad police work instead of creating issues about situations where we don't know whether it was bad police work or not yet. And so I think technology is going to assist with that, and it will also assist with people understanding the dynamics of what goes on when a police officer has to make this choice. It's not a choice they want to make, but sometimes they have to. And if people can actually see this played out in real time, I think they'll be able to have more sympathy for the job of police officers, understand why that decision was made, and say, this was a good shooting. And what we'll also do, it'll capture the bad shootings, and it'll be not black and white per se, but it'll be much more clear about what went wrong, and then the agency can take the appropriate action. The chief can fire the officer, the prosecutors can prosecute the officer, whatever the case might be.
One issue that we should keep on the table is crime. The vast majority of the complaints the police receive, not simply in St. Louis region, everywhere, is where are you when we need you? This neighborhood has problems. Sometimes it's a low serious crime neighborhood. The problems are disorder and that sort of thing. Sometimes they're much more serious crimes, but the chief complaint police get is, why aren't you here addressing our crime problems? One of the ironies, if that's the word, about the current situation is that as the police prepare for a grand jury decision, as the police have had to address protest activity, all of which is necessary activity, it takes them off their ordinary day-to-day crime-reducing, crime-fighting functions. And that's something I think the community needs to realize. That's no excuse or no argument against protest. But, you know, policing is a world like all the other worlds we live in of finite resources. And if you're moving police over in this area, you've got fewer police to deal with fundamental problems that people normally complain about when they don't see the police around in their neighborhood.
Local, as we said.
Yes.
One of the things I wanted to talk about briefly with cameras, and your report didn't talk about it, but civil liberties, let's talk about the value that video evidence provides the police as opposed to eyewitness video and the inaccuracies that we've seen over the years play out in criminal courts. I mean, it's invaluable to have a camera video evidence that can be analyzed to be used to build a case. Both prosecutors, I think, would agree, has more credibility and more weight than eyewitness testimony. And one other subtlety about your report was, you know, we use terms like mass surveillance, and that really gets people squirming in their seat. As cameras relate to the Central West End, we have a very passive system. We have cameras put up in strategic locations, hoping to capture good, actionable intelligence that we can pass on to the police if there is an event. But when I hear the term surveillance, it's more of an action where somebody's watching and acting on what they're seeing immediately. And then Cortez brought that up, where actually that surveillance type of approach worked. And it generated an immediate response, which resulted in an arrest. The funding for that, though, is just exorbitant, and I don't know how communities like ours can afford that. But what we have and what we can afford is providing us with great results, and we're looking at expanding it.
We're almost out of time. I'll give you the last word, John. We have a few comments on cameras here.
Well, when we talk about mass surveillance, the city is envisioning a network that will cover the entire city. So when you have a network like that, you're able, through facial recognition and other software, to track people as they move around the city. And that's why I think the phrase mass surveillance is important. Nobody wants to be tracked as they move from a political rally to their doctor's office to their place of worship. Nobody wants to be tracked so that their daily schedule is known to everyone in terms of, you know, if this is Sunshine Request accessible information, then burglars can sunshine what your route is to work every day and when you leave the house and when you come home. Those are the types of concerns that we are raising when we talk about mass surveillance and the creation of a network.